Greetings, and welcome back to the MCOC Encyclopedia. It's that time once again. Let's update the tier list. For those of you that haven't seen this tier list before, let me explain. The further right a champion is on the tier list, the more often they can be used, and the further up a champion is, the better they are in that optimal scenario. This is to allow champions that are specialists, but are only very good in niche scenarios, to still be recognised for being good at what they are. The classic example is Ronan, over here in 110, right in the top left, because he is extremely good, probably the best champion in the game, but only in a very, very few scenarios, i.e. when he's awakened, and there are lots of buffs on the opponent. Please note also that this tier list does not include synergies, and is for offense only. This is not a defensive tier list. First up, we have Negasonic Teenage Warhead, here in 2-8, so that's 2 often and 8 good. Negasonic is not the most impressive champion if you just look at her in a generic matchup, or say against Realm of Legends Winter Soldier. What she does have though, is the incredible ability to completely shut down every major defensive threat in the skill class. All her abilities revolve around passives rather than debuffs, and all of her attacks are non-contact, meaning that a tumor doesn't matter, kingpin doesn't matter, even bullseye, not much of an issue at all. Her raw damage output isn't hugely impressive, but her incinerates can hit a decent level once the fight's been going, for a little bit, 1 special 2, and then a special 1, maybe 1 or 2 special 1s, and the damage over time is at least decent. Again, not the flashiest champion, but she is an excellent counter to a lot of current skill defenders. 2-8. Silver Sable comes in at 6-4, 6 often, 4 good. She is okay, and she can be a bit better than okay if the AI plays ball, which a lot of the time, it doesn't. Her rotation involves spamming a few special 1s, building up some shocks, and then going for a big burst on the special 2. And if you can line it all up, the burst is okay. But she really reminds me of Craven. When things go well, they are pretty good, but when things don't, they really aren't. She could use a little bit more damage, and maybe some way of manipulating the AI, to make her just that bit more reliable. Metal Sonic Dude has a very good video explaining some of her major problems, and also some potential fixes, though she is still subject to rebalancing that'll be coming in a couple of months. Will these fix her issues? We don't know yet, but currently 6-4. Arcade joins the contest at 8-6, though his animations are an absolute 10. This guy is all over the place, well done Kabam art team. Most of his damage comes from his damage over time effects, of which he can have Incinerate, Poison, Shock, and Bleeds all going at once, and I believe he has access to Rupture on his special 3 as well. Against non-cosmics, he can also have access to 2 of Incinerate, Poison, or Shock immunity, and whilst his damage isn't going to be made up of big yellow numbers, over time, all of that damage over time, does add up to a fairly decent damage output. Nothing to write home about, but he is still very good. He brings a lot of utility to the table because he can cover a lot of modern nodes. Many nodes, for example, Thunderstruck, Acid Wash, Bloody Mess, and so on, he can cover them all because he has access to lots of different debuffs. This is both a blessing and a curse because it makes it highly likely that an opponent will be immune to at least one of his debuffs, but given they all come from different sources, it's not too difficult to work your way around. It will reduce his damage output slightly, so you want to try and fight champions with no immunities at all, which aren't the most common, but it is extremely unlikely that they will be immune to all of them, meaning he can always get some sort of damage in. He is also very safe to play, with his arcade tokens giving him massively increased armor rating, and as these don't count as armor up buffs, they aren't counted by traditional means, though armor breaks will still do their thing. Combine that with his auto block, and you have a nicely rounded champion. Not the flashiest, but certainly 8-6 material. And finally we have Northstar coming in at 5-7. He is fairly similar to Strife in how he works, except that he ramps up in each fight, but doesn't carry it fight to fight. What this means though, is that max ramp Northstar will have a higher damage output than max ramp Strife. This is for balancing purposes because Strife can go straight into the next matchup at that ramp, where Northstar has to ramp once more in that fight. Having no major immunities does hurt him somewhat and holds him back from those higher often slots, but his passive slow is extremely nice for countering unstoppable and evade effects, and his sig against physical damage can make him an absolute tank. He gains a huge amount of physical resistance, which will reduce the incoming damage significantly. He's also an excellent crit resistance counter for champions like Killmonger, with his armor break uniquely reducing critical resistance. Overall, he's a fairly simple champion to play as well. Simply spamming specials, either special 1 or special 2 will kind of work, going for the big burst on the special 2 and the ramp up on the special 1. Overall, 5/7. And now for some buffs. Gladiator's buff just missed out on the previous tier list, so on this one he's going from 4/4 to 8/7. He received a very solid buff, fixing many of the issues that he had. Converting his Intimidate from a debuff to a passive makes him usable in Shrugger matchups, and even without the sort of weird hitting into specials playstyle, which does give him access to huge amounts of damage, though can be a little risky, he still has some excellent damage output and utility. 8/7. The second buff we've got recently is Mr. Sinister, going from 8/4 to 9/7. Mr. Sinister is now an excellent champion. He has a huge amount of damage just from charging his heavy and his special 1, and without much support that can easily reach the hundreds of thousands of damage right from the start of the fight. He's also effectively immune to every single damaging debuff in the game, as just by throwing your special 1 you remove all of them off yourself and convert them into degens on the opponent. He isn't exactly immune, but he can get rid of them when needed, so I wouldn't use them against champions that have very big but short ones. But for anyone that has longer ones, even infinite duration ones, he can throw them straight off. He's also completely resistant to bleed, and likes to put bleeds on himself, meaning you have constant full power willpower ticking away, keeping you topped up. Combine that with his regen from crits, and you have a very solid champion. 9/7. We have no demotions on the tier list this month, nor do we have any champions that are sort of staying at about the same level, but just moving around for clarity's sake. I do have my eye on Bullseye for a potential promotion, and for Spider-Punk as well, but I want to play around with them a little bit more personally before we commit to any changes. So, there we have it, the July update for the tier list. Patriot and the Leader haven't been included here. As of the time of recording of this video, they aren't playable characters just yet. They'll be on the next one. If you have any questions, please do leave them down below, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. I do also have a Discord server, a great place to get specific advice, make suggestions for future video topics, and while I'm awake, I do my best to be there as much as possible. Thank you, and I will see you next time.